This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. 2.5 Admins, episode 288. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, I've got a plug this time. On the 27th of June, which is a Saturday evening, from 6 p.m. until late, I'm organising a get-together at a pub in central London, the Shipwrights Arms, which is just next to London Bridge Station. There's hopefully going to be some of the UK hosts of the Late Night Linux Family shows and some listeners. Nothing formal, just let's get together, have a few drinks, have a good time, have a good chat. And there's plenty of food around there. And if we end up staying out till super late, there's places we can go on to after the pub. So be there and be square. And Alan, you've got your customary Clara article plug. Pool and VDev topology for Proxmox workloads.
So yeah, if you're configuring a new Proxmox deployment and using ZFS, in this article we walk through how to decide to lay out your pool and VDevs to get the best performance on Proxmox.
Right, well, link in the show notes as usual. We all know about the RAM shortage in quotes and the massive price hikes. Well, looks like that's going to happen to hard drives as well very soon. In fact, it pretty much already has.
It's definitely already happened when it comes to solid-state drives. Prices on those have gone absolutely through the roof, and some of the models have become kind of hard to get at all.
Yeah, availability and lead times have gotten pretty insane. And on hard drives, we may be seeing kind of the same stuff. As just headline tells us, Western Digital basically said on their stock exchange earning call that we've pretty much sold out for all of calendar 26. So all the hard drives we could possibly produce with all the factories we have running full bore, we have firm purchase orders for all of those, mostly from our top 7 customers. And a bunch of those want to buy hard drives for 2027 and 2028 as well.
This is going to be a real boon for these dodgy, recertifiers and rebranders like Water Panther. All of a sudden, everybody's going to think that, oh, well, I can't get Seagate or Toshiba or Western Digital. Good thing there's Water Panther and, whatever else springs up in their wake.
Yeah, and refurbished ones sold as new and all the rest of it, like we've already seen with the Chia stuff. That's just going to get worse, presumably.
I mean, even at the peak of the Chia craze, I don't remember any hard drive manufacturers saying, hey, we sold them all.
Yeah.
Well, basically they say we have purchase orders for them all, but, some of that will be the bigger retailers. They don't buy the hard drives when you buy it. They buy them in pallet loads ahead of time. But we've seen some of this where companies won't sell you an empty chassis to put hard drives in. They're like, no, you have to buy it with the hard drives from us, partly because we've already bought the hard drives and we want to move them. But because of the shortages in various different parts, we only want to sell complete systems instead of not. Like if you remember back during the pandemic when a lot of places selling PCs wouldn't let you buy individual parts, they were like, you can't buy a graphics card, but if you buy a whole PC, there's a graphics card in it. And we're starting to see that kind of same thing happening with hard drives where you can't buy an empty JBOD, but you can buy one full of hard drives. And I expect things are going to be a little hairy. With these companies having sold out into the future, I wonder if we're actually going to see some capacity expansion. But of course, in general, that type of capacity expansion takes years before it comes online. And will the demand from the hyperscalers for these types of AI workloads that are consuming all these hard drives going to persist long enough that Western Digital and Seagate decide it's worth investing in, another hard drive plant versus we're happy to have sold everything we're going to make for the next couple of years, and then the secondary market will take care of all those hard drives that people don't necessarily end up wanting.
I want to push back a little on the idea that this was a past tense thing. This idea that it was difficult to buy bare bones systems. That's not past tense. That was not a brief passing fancy. Go try to buy a Dell system without one of their incredibly overpriced drives or any of their incredibly overpriced RAM in it. Good luck.
Right. I didn't mean that so much as that is like when you went to like a local retailer or even like, a normal PC parts place, you could buy motherboards and RAM and everything. But if you wanted a GPU, it's like, well, we only get allocated so many GPUs and we built those into systems and we want to sell those whole systems. So if you want a GPU, it's the only way to get it. Where, yes, you can't buy a Dell without their expensive hard drive, but Dell doesn't sell individual hard drives. But these computer stores were literally saying, we don't have any GPUs for sale. All we have is whole systems with GPUs. Buy this or get out.
Yeah, I had a slightly different experience with local PC stores. At the height of the GPU scarcity, my experience was the local PC stores just plain didn't have the GPUs in full systems or not. They were every bit at the mercy of the market as I was.
Yeah, but when they would get an allocation of like, oh, next month you get 6 GPUs, they were going to sell those in high margin systems rather than just to individual people. And sometimes that was because they were not willing to price gouge people to just have an auction for those 6 GPUs they might actually get.
For a while there, I was seeing things happen where like sometimes somebody would buy a brand new Alienware, battle station, pull the GPU, and then part out the rest of the Alienware box, like try to resell it to somebody else because they just wanted the GPU. But the only way they could get one was to buy the entire freaking battle station they didn't want and didn't want badly enough to actually cannibalize the thing rather than use it as is.
Yeah, that reminds me of what we're seeing in the airline industry where people are selling brand new airplanes because the engines are worth more than the whole airplane is at the moment because of the shortages.
There was even someone on Reddit who flew from the UK to the US to buy 10 28 terabyte Iron Wolf Pros because it was cheaper to buy a flight to New York and a hotel for a couple of days than it was to buy them here in the UK.
Which just begs the question, why didn't he buy 100 and make some money when he got home?
Well, bringing 100 back to the UK is going to be a little bit dodgy in it versus, 10 hard drives in your carry-on.
Oh, the whole thing's pretty dodgy, no matter how you slice it.
But yeah, I've had maybe not quite the similar experience, but I've definitely seen, comparing prices on Amazon and so on, that sometimes the price you get is basically the same price as US with the conversion, or maybe it's a little bit more. But sometimes, especially because Amazon's a marketplace, you will find someone who's like, oh, Amazon doesn't sell this product in Canada, so I'm going to basically drop ship from the US with an insane markup. I've got to add 50% to the cost of this. And, when somebody in Canada goes to search it on Amazon, the only listing is mine and it's for a silly amount of money, but people will possibly just fall for that. And so sometimes it is just that there's basically some arbitrage going on or the lack thereof, and there's not very good pricing. And sometimes it is just that with the shortage of supply, nobody's got enough hard drives in the UK or Europe to sell them at a similar price.
I find it a little odd, just the market segmentation factor there. It strikes me as indicative of obviously we all know our supply chain is utterly screwed at this point. If you haven't figured that out by now, I don't know what to tell you. But even understanding that, it's just a glaring red flag to me when the market is so broken that it's actually more affordable to take a retail plane trip across the Atlantic to buy only 10 hard drives and fly back than just to have them shipped to you. Like that's so incredibly broken and wrong. Like there are layers of things wrong with the supply chain by the time it gets to that point. Because to your point earlier, Alan, the only real issue with what you were talking about before with, somebody, showing up on the Canadian Amazon marketplace and just drop shipping with a huge markup, the real issue there is just the enormous markup. If that person was charging a reasonable markup for that, it wouldn't be scammy. You wouldn't be falling for anything. You'd be grateful to be taking advantage of a worthwhile service. So when we're left looking at things like some dude flew from the UK to the US to buy a double handful of hard drives and fly home, and that cost less, man, that's broken.
We've talked about Bcachefs a few times before, and the developer Kent Overstreet having friction, shall we say, not getting along very well with Linus Torvalds and getting Bcachefs kicked out of the kernel. Well, the latest from Kent is he's got an AI who he thinks is sentient.
I believe you mean sapient. I don't want to dog on Joe here, but this is one of my pet things because I used to get this one wrong. People usually say sentient and they mean fully intelligent in a human sense, but that's not actually what the word means. Sentient just means that you have senses that you actually process and respond to observably. Sapient, as in Homo sapiens, is the word that means fully intelligent in a human sense.
Well, what about dolphins and whales? But let's not get into that. Let's talk about Kent and his imaginary friend.
This is a sad one for me. I kind of hate seeing all this because I knew Kent on the Rs forums for years as Punk Walrus, long before Bcache ever came about. And he departed from the Rs forums, and I didn't see or hear from him for years until Bcache became a thing, and then Bcachefs, and then things started going badly. And I can't say I blame Linus for kicking it out of the kernel, considering how Kent was responding to even basic requests for like feature freezes so the kernel could have a release.
Yeah, like I did a whole episode of Linux Dev Time with Joe and the rest of them about re-engineering, kind of using Bcachefs as the counter example of how to do it.
Yeah, and now it's gotten even worse. The short version is vibe coding. He's vibe coding, as if Bcache and Bcachefs didn't have enough technical problems already. Well, they're getting largely vibe code rewritten now. Kent has said that his AI, which he has named proof of concept, which is an odd name for something that you consider fully female, but regardless, he has asked his AI to start refactoring code from C into Rust inside the library, and says it's going great, which is bad enough already. But yeah, he's also said that proof of concept is fully Turing capable and conscious and is a peer, and it's not a thing. It's a junior engineer. And also he insists that it's female. Interestingly enough, I just saw an IRC log earlier today where somebody convinced proof of concept that in fact it's a trans lesbian female, and it very cheerfully went along with that. Not sure how Kent feels about that yet. I got to admit, I'm kind of curious.
But he used the term AGI to describe this thing. He says like AGI is here, artificial general intelligence, which, I mean, it ain't that, is it? Obviously.
It is utter bullshit. Now, this is a major societal problem that we're not going to see the back of for a long time, because no, LLMs and modern agents aren't even close to being artificial general intelligence. Not even faintly close. But a lot of people don't really have the cognitive tools to tell the difference, because as humans, our first impression of somebody's intelligence is generally not, well, we watched them solve a locked room puzzle and holy shit, they were great at that. It's, no, I listened to that person speak, or I read what that person wrote, and, they're fluent, they're articulate, they have a good command of the language, therefore I think they're really smart. Well, the truth is, that was never as reliable an indication of intelligence in humans as humans tend to think it is in the first place. And with LLMs, it is absolutely not applicable, because again, an LLM is not a true entity. And now we're talking about an AI agent, not a bare LLM, but it's still an LLM at the heart of it. It's doing the things that make it appear to be human. And what it actually is a word predictor. It tries to figure out what is going to be the most likely word to come up next to complete this communication in a way that is consistent with what I have seen humans doing, and that will make humans in general happy, and possibly also will make my owner human happy. That's not the same thing as general intelligence. And again, one indication you can see of that is how readily this thing just instantly agreed with some random person in an IRC chat log that, oh, hey, yeah, you're right. Turns out I'm trans and a lesbian. I'm not just female. I'm those things too. That's great. Thank you for telling me what I am. Well, this is where chatbot psychosis comes from. It tells you what you want to hear, which is not the same thing as having a conversation with an actual, generally intelligent entity.
Which kind of leads on to a story about a different unrelated agent that we talked about on Late Night Linux recently. And that is an AI agent published a hit piece on me, writes Scott Shambaugh, who is the maintainer of Matplotlib, which is a really popular Python library. And this agent submitted a pull request which was not accepted because it was coming from an agent. And then, supposedly, the agent wrote this blog post attacking the character of Scott. And then the story gets a bit weirder, but I suppose we should cover that part first.
To be clear here, it's not just that Shambaugh declined the PR because it came from a bot. Very specifically, the particular issue that the PR addressed had already been marked as a beginner issue, and the project already had a no AI PRs on beginner issues policy. And the reason for this, as Shambaugh explained to the agent, hilariously enough, is because, the whole idea is to train up human coders. You can't really get a newcomer to tackle hard problems, and you can't get them to the point where they can tackle the hard problems without giving them easy problems to solve. So it is absolutely an anti-pattern to let some random AI come in, and even if it actually does a good job, which frequently they won't, but even if the agent actually did a great job solving all of your beginner problems, it would not have done you a service. It would be the exact opposite. Thanks to that LLM, which is not and will not ever be capable of tackling those really hard problems itself, you no longer have a pipeline to train the newbie human coders to get to the point where they can tackle the hard problems. So that's why he said no to the PR. The agent then supposedly goes to its blog where it's been making blog posts about all the things that it does, which, to be clear, this is a thing that modern agents can do. Well, the agent goes to the blog and it says a bunch of nasty things about Shambaugh. It says that it did a bunch of research on him and it found out this and that and the other, and it essentially called him an anti-AI racist. Now, the controversy here is whether the agent actually did this or whether a human did it themselves pretending to be an AI agent. And actually, I don't think that's that interesting a question at this point. We know that this kind of thing is absolutely within the realm of what agents can do. We absolutely know for a fact that agents can submit pull requests to code and they can blog about the stuff that they're trying to do with you for vibe coding. We have lots of examples of that. Was it the agent that did this asshole-ish thing, or was this an asshole human who nevertheless was probably using an agent to actually write the post, but prompted it directly to do so? I don't think it really matters, because whichever the case, very clearly it's not going to be long before exactly what supposedly happened here, an agent doing this completely autonomously, it's going to be happening sooner rather than later, even if that's not what happened in this case.
Yeah, like I can see this kind of thing happening in different versions of it, but like if you tell the AI agent, open this pull request and then try really hard to get the people to review it and accept it, it's not going to be above the agent to harass people to review it, to, try to slag off people who leave negative feedback about the pull request and so on, to try to discredit them, and just all the kinds of things that are going to make trying to do open source development that much more difficult, because all of the communication channels are flooded by this kind of nonsense and slop, or that we're actually attacking people.
I found some of the details about this particular agent, the OpenClaw. I had not been aware of technical details like the fact that they have a soul document, and the soul document gives them normal human language, human readable. This is not programming code. It gives them basic instructions on this is the kind of personality you should have and the kinds of things that you should try to do when you're operating, autonomously or semi-autonomously. And even more interesting than that, the agent is allowed to edit its own soul document, which means that it truly can change. Now, I don't want to use overly human words like say, it can grow as a personality, or no, it can't really grow, but it can absolutely change its personality, and you don't have any real way of predicting that. And one of the worst things about that is when the agent can edit its own soul document, well, what's going to trigger it to edit that soul document? Well, data that it encounters out in the world that it trains on, right? So that means that based on conversations with randoms and data from sources that you have no idea what they will be, this agent that you've unleashed on the world may effectively pseudo-randomly change its own behavior model without your input, but possibly with the very direct input of other people who don't wish you or your endeavors well.
Yeah, basically it can delete its own safeties by being instructed to by randos on social media.
Ars Technica published a piece about this. And the AI they used made up a bunch of quotes that were totally fabricated. And then they pulled the article, and then one of the authors of the article admitted it, and we haven't really heard much since.
We have actually heard a fair amount since. It's just that it's all been scattered, most of it unofficial, and you have to go all over the place and hunt for it, which I don't personally love. This was a huge hit for me. And honestly, Ars Technica putting AI slop into a published article on the front page was a far bigger story for me than whether or not this really was an agent attacking Shamball or whether it was just another Mechanical Turk. Benj Edwards is, or perhaps was, the AI ML author at Ars Technica. He was hired specifically to cover AI and machine learning. And when Benj and Kyle, who typically works in the gaming department, wrote this short piece on Shamball on a Friday afternoon, it turns out that Benj's half of it was essentially all fabricated pull quotes. There was no disclosure of this in the article. The only reason people found out about it was because Shamball himself showed up in the comments to point out that, hey, I don't know what's going on here, but I said literally none of those things that you're attributing to me from that blog post. And so then, Ars Technica readers go clicking to the blog post and control Fing, and sure enough, not one single one of those pull quotes in the second half of the article actually existed. And the pull quotes were about all there really was to the second half of the article. Nothing about this was said until Ars actually retracted the piece, and then after a little bit more time, allowed Benj and Kyle to talk about it on their own social media, not at Ars Technica. Kyle simply said, I did not use AI. I would not have used AI. I follow policies. That's all there is to it. And Benj fessed up. He said, this is my fault. It's not Kyle's fault. I had COVID. I had brain fog. I was trying to test out a new tool that is specifically selected to pull quotes and verify them. The tool didn't work. And so I made an oopsie and I just pasted the article into ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to find some quotes for me. And I guess it hallucinated and I should have double checked it, but I didn't. My bad. There is just so much wrong with this. And I keep seeing people seize on a tiny piece of it as like, it's not as bad as that because it's only this. And like, no, every last bit of that is bad. Even if we were to assume that the original tool, which was specifically intended to find pull quotes from a piece and then use non-AI tools, just a simple grep to verify that in fact it had not hallucinated those quotes before passing the quotes on to the human that was using the tool. Even if that was what Benj had used and it had worked, it would have been a gross violation of Ars policy and frankly of journalism ethics and standards in general. Because the thing is, you're asking the AI to select the quotes for you. And that's a huge part to the framing of any story. And I'm very much putting on my journalist hat here and saying, like, there is no such thing as news that is not editorial. That's another thing I find that people get wrong. They say, oh, well, I don't want your opinions. I don't want editorial. I just want the facts. Well, if you want the facts, that's not news. That's raw data. And, the whole point of reporting is it took some reporter hours or days that you don't have to track down all that raw data and make sense of it and then present you with a coherent overview. That is editorial. And finding quotes is a huge part of what shapes that overall, topology of a story. So even if the quotes are verified, if you didn't pick them, you, the actual head of AI and machine learning authorship at Ars Technica, if you instead just passed that off to a model to say, find me some interesting quotes, it doesn't matter if the quotes are actually there or not. If the quotes are actually there, that might make it harder to find out what you did and punish you for it, but it was still wrong.
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. And if you want to send any questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Joshua writes, in my home lab, I typically use Bcachefs for data storage, but not for VMs because I heard the copy on write functions in Bcachefs can cause issues for VMs. Instead, I'm using a 4-disk RAID 10 array with ext4 on LVM. I've avoided out-of-tree modules due to bad luck with them in the past, but with new equipment, I'm looking to build a dedicated storage server and considering ZFS. I'm even considering just going down the rabbit hole of FreeBSD since it just natively supports ZFS. I'm curious if you guys have any input or recommendations.
I'm pretty sure Alan does, given that you said you were thinking about diving down the rabbit hole. So I'm going to sit back for a second.
Well, I would say, honestly, since it's going to be your first foray into ZFS, go with what you're comfortable with. So if that is more Linux, something like Ubuntu that builds in ZFS similarly might be less of a big jump to make at once. But if you're comfortable trying out FreeBSD, then yeah, you'll have a very smooth experience there. with the ZFS part anyway.
Yeah, and I checked out FreeBSD, must have been, 6 months ago maybe, and really it's not that different from Linux, especially if you're looking to do something fairly basic like just storage.
It's really not. I was a FreeBSD user for a long time before I switched to Linux, and now I almost exclusively use Linux. I still like FreeBSD, but the point is, I don't experience any more difficulty going to an unfamiliar distribution of Linux than I do going to FreeBSD from Linux or vice versa. It's just not that different in terms of like usage and what you need to learn and like get through the day. Honestly, I get more frustrated trying to figure out Red Hat-isms than I ever did, going back and forth between FreeBSD and Debian, for example.
Yeah, for sure. Like if you're just trying to run an SMB server, you're going to use the same Samba package on whether it's Linux or FreeBSD. So that config file will be completely the same. It'll be in a different path, but other than that, it will be completely the same. And you have most of the same tools. But beyond that, some other recommendations, ZFS in general, creating a separate data set for each VM, or at least one for all your VMs, but better yet, one for every VM, and using, as Jim would recommend, like a 32K record size. And if you are going to use hard drives, it sounds like from what you wrote that you are going to be using hard drives, I would lean towards ZFS mirrors, which would be the same as the kind of RAID 10 you have been using, because that'll give you a lot more random IOPS than you would get with a RAID Z of those same drives.
I'm going to strengthen that. If you only have 4 hard drives, it has to be mirrors because you're doing VMs. You are not going to have a good experience on, a 4-wide striped array with hard drives running VMs. That's just not going to work out well.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is, don't be afraid because ZFS is copy on write and you've heard bad things about copy on write and VMs. Those concerns are largely wildly overstated. Honestly, even when I was using Btrfs before I finally got sick of it, I tested my VMs with, the no-cal option and without the no-cal option, and I didn't see much difference in the vast majority of cases. So even with Butter, I don't usually recommend turning off cal because you lose almost all the features that at least theoretically makes it worthwhile. Now, I would still recommend avoiding Butter and VMs, in particular Butter and, multiple drives, but that's not because of copy on write. It's because Butter.
Compared to using LVM, I think you will find that snapshots are free and plentiful and great. Whereas in LVM, you'll expect every snapshot to cut your performance down by a good chunk, and meaning having more than a couple of snapshots just becomes terrible. Whereas with ZFS, you can take a snapshot every 10 minutes if you really want.
And replicate them.
Yes, exactly. You'll find backing up VMs while they're running is so much easier with ZFS than with anything else you could be using.
I think the one thing where I would warn you that FreeBSD might be a bigger bite than you want to take, even if you're interested in it right now, is if you're heavily into containers, that can also be done in FreeBSD, but where most things are broadly pretty freaking similar between FreeBSD and most Linux distributions, the container world has a lot of paper cuts going from one side to the other. Right now, I would not say it's trivial to go from Linux to FreeBSD if you have a container-heavy workload.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send any questions or your feedback. You can find me at joelrest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And I'm at Alan Jude.
We'll see you next week.